Okay, so it looks like this hand is pretty questionable. Um, Three white cards, no white mana. Let's hope for a better hand on six. Well, we can keep this, but we're still going to need lands. We're going to need a lot to go right with this hand. But it's probably better to keep it than go to 5. So hopefully our opponent doesn't come out of the gates too quickly, because if that happens, there's not going to be a whole lot we can do. This Commune with the Gods and Urborg Uprising are going to take a bit of time to get online. And it looks like our opponent's playing red-white. So red-white is normally a more aggressive-based strategy. But let's see what we can find off this Commune. And it looks like the option is between Honden of Seeing Winds and Mana War. Pretty close decision, but I think we may just have to take this Mana War just to stay alive against an aggressive deck. Although the Honden of Seeing Winds is definitely a card that would give us a bunch of value. We took the Mana War. Seems like the correct choice, but definitely isn't fun to have to take Mana War over one of the deck's signature key cards in Honden of Seeing Winds. But Young Pyromancer is just going to come in and our opponent's going to pass. So rather than play the Mana War, there's really no need to force the issue. So I like just playing a land. Hopefully our opponent doesn't have something like Raise the Alarm here or some form of pressure. And it looks like it's just going to be an untap from our opponent. So what's this going to be? We shall see. It's a Glimmerpoint Stag. That's just going to be a 4-mana 3/3 Vigilance, which is pretty good here, but it's not amazing. Sometimes Glimmerpoint Stag is significantly better than that. And so we're going to have to make a judgment call here in terms of, do we feel like there's enough time to cast this Honden? And that's a pretty tough question. We may just want to play the Pacifism now on the Stag, and I think that's just a good play. And we'll just wait on the Honden, wait on our Mana War, locking down the Stag, which is our opponent's biggest threat right now. And hopefully our opponent doesn't have something significantly better than that we wish we Pacifismed. Or another Glimmerpoint Stag, but it looks like it's going to be Flamekin Zealot. So that's still pretty good. It's going to mean we're taking 6 damage. And once again, we have a bit of a decision here in terms of, do we play the Honden? But personally, rather just play this Mana War and try to stabilize the board a little bit first. So we're going to bounce this Young Pyromancer and then have the Mana War to be able to block the Flamekin Zealot, potentially. We'll see if our opponent has Young Pyromancer plus a removal spell. And Mog Fanatic is not exactly a removal spell. Alright, so our opponent is just passing, so I guess it's time to unleash the Honden. Don't really have too much else we can do anyways. We're working towards this Maelstrom Wanderer. Hopefully we get to cast it with at least a little bit of life to play with, but that could just be too much to ask for, knowing we're playing against red-white. So here, a couple different options in terms of where we want to go with a block, but it feels like just getting this young Pyromancer off the table could be a smart move. And so, yeah, the other option would have been to block the Mog Fanatic, but considering we have Urborg Uprising to return the Mana War, we might actually just rather it be in the graveyard. But we drew this green Honden, so of course we're going to play that rather than the Urborg Uprising. And so hopefully on our opponent's turn, it's just an attack for 3. We can untap, force the discarding of 2 cards, generate 2 saplings, and start to begin to actually take over the game. So things were looking pretty hairy at the start. Now things are looking better. And it could be that our opponent's somewhat flooded now and didn't stack these the way it wanted to, but probably isn't relevant. Okay, so our opponent is, just discarding a couple of lands. Makes sense. So we can cast the Urborg Uprising or just play this freshly drawn Yavimaya Enchantress, which is pretty good here. We're still 1 land off from the Maelstrom Wanderer, but doesn't feel like we need to force the issue by trying to dig for a land or returning the Mana War. So, okay, our opponent has a Sting Scourger. It'll be interesting to see what ends up being bounced, and it looks like it's just going to be the Enchantress. So I would expect our opponent to attack with both creatures here. And if that's the case, I like just blocking 1 on each. We're just trying to conserve our life total, and we're going to still be generating more saplings, so we're going to have more for blocks later on. And let's see what our opponent's last card in hand is. Is it a spell or a land? It's actually Second Thoughts. So that makes sense. Our opponent never really had a chance to cast that. And Annihilate is going to be the draw step. So we've got a bunch of good options actually, but just going to replay this Yavimaya Enchantress. We'll see if our opponent wants to pay the Echo on the Sting Scourger or not. But they don't have much better to do other than pay the Echo. However, if our opponent draws a 3 casting cost card, they're just going to have to discard it to the Honden. So paying this Echo was a little bit risky. Either way, though, we're in a pretty commanding spot now. Doesn't feel like much can go wrong. And yeah, it was actually a battle squadron, which would have been somewhat annoying. So let's go ahead and start the beatdown process with the Yavimaya Enchantress. And it looks like we're going to have access to Maelstrom Wanderer next turn. So we can just have this Annihilate at the ready. Keldon Marauders is not bad. One of the only ways we could lose this game would be to direct damage, so I like just using up our Annihilate here, making good use of our mana. And take care of this Flamekin Zealot. And of course now our opponent doesn't have any cards left to discard. So I think it's about that time in the game where we want to just deploy our big daddy, our Maelstrom Wanderer. And here we go. Let's see what we cascade into. Phantom Monster. Alright, there's a good one. We will definitely take that one. And wow, Visara! Visara, and it has haste. That's insane. Oh my gosh. I love it. Officially in love with Maelstrom Wanderer. So, wow, okay. Yeah, our opponent's just gonna concede. I mean, that was just insane. Oh my gosh. Alright. So that's a thing. Maelstrom Wanderer cascading into Visara. Visara's triple black, and we're playing Maelstrom Wanderer, which is blue, red, and green. I hope I'm not the only one that finds that hilarious. Oh, this deck is something else. It really is. So, all right. I guess we should probably figure out how we want to sideboard against this red-white deck. So that Ouroboros Uprising has just done nothing. It's not that good of a card to begin with. So let's go ahead and cut it. I think we can cut the Milken as well. If we're cutting the Ouroboros Uprising. Cards we may want. Mana War seems like a reasonable addition to our deck at this point. So does Peregrine Drake, but if we board in both of these cards, we are going to need to add in at least one more island, if not two. So, alright, let's add in one more island. And we can probably afford to cut a Plains. Possibly cut this Monk Idealist. Although that leaves us room with one more card. I think we might want this Nausea. We saw some 1 toughness creatures. So let's go with this. Whew. We were definitely kind of already in the driver's seat, but that was definitely one of the best ways of winning a game in this format. And I think this hand is fine. We've only got 2 spells, and we have no green mana, but on the flip side, our 2 spells are pretty good. We can cast them both. And it looks like our opponent is going to have to mulligan, so we shall see how things play out. And that was actually one of our best draws, because it's pretty likely we'll be able to survive until getting these Hundens into play. And once they get into play, I mean, we all know how that goes. The lands, while they come into play tapped, gaining 1 is definitely relevant against a deck with lots of direct damage, which red-white tends to have. And we see an example of that already in turn 2 Keldon Marauders. Unfortunately, our Mana War does not match up particularly well against Keldon Marauders. We do not want to bounce it. So if our opponent doesn't play a creature, we will not be deploying Mana War on our 3rd turn. But that being said, since our opponent did not deploy a creature, there's very little pressure. The Marauders should end up getting sacrificed unless our opponent has something like a White Mane Lion. And then we can just go, boom, Honden of Cleansing Fire. And then once we get to turn 5, that's going to be good. But it actually looks like our opponent has the White Mane Lion. So that's pretty annoying. That allows our opponent to bounce the Keldon Marauders, have a 2/2 in play, and so that's going to start applying some real pressure. The attack from the Lion is going to bring us to 16, then the Marauders is going to bring us to 15. Hopefully our opponent doesn't have something else in addition to that. But pretty happy that we, even though drawing 200 no Cleansing Fire is bad, just being able to play it on turn 4 is so good against these types of decks. We also have Peregrine Drake, which means on turn 5 we can potentially go Drake plus Honden of Seeing Winds. And now we have the trifecta of Hundens. But I think we still want to just start with the white one. The black one actually is pretty useless here, but that's fine. Sometimes the black one is good. This isn't really the matchup for it, so could have been we should have boarded it out, but in any case, assuming our opponent doesn't have a removal spell for this Honden, I think we're in a good spot. Although we are going to take 5 down to 10, assuming that our opponent doesn't have a haste threat as well. And it looks like this could even be a pump effect. We'll see. Okay, Rally the Peasants. That's going to be an additional 4 damage. So we are down to 6. But this Keldon Marauders is going to be sacrificed on our opponent's next turn. At least theoretically. So, we're definitely going to want to play our Peregrine Drake. That's going to allow us to play it and then be able to also deploy an additional threat, which is very important here. So we're just going to untap all of our lands and then play the blue Honden. Best case scenario for our opponent would be another white main lion here, but it looks like they don't have one, so the Marauders is going to be sacrificed. If our opponent attacks with the white main lion, we're certainly going to block, because as long as we survive this turn, we're going to be able to untap, get multiple Honden activations, and basically just take over this game. But Core Hookmaster is okay. It's going to lock down our Drake and bring us down to 5. And we have to constantly be remembering that our opponent has a Rally the Peasants in the graveyard. So our draws off the Hundens were not the best, because we're just kind of trying to conserve our life total. So casting Phyrexian Gargantua doesn't seem that appealing at the moment. We could cast Mana War, however, we don't necessarily want to bounce either of these creatures, is the issue. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and cast the Wake of Vultures. I'm not in love with it, but I'm going to go for it. Hopefully our opponent doesn't have some insane play that kills us or something of that nature. Alright, Sting Scourger's definitely annoying. So our opponent can Sting Scourger the Wake of Vultures and then Rally the Peasants to bring us down to 1. That's pretty bad news. Crud. Well, I'm guessing that's what our opponent's going to do this turn. Yep, there's the flashback. And that's going to put us down to 1. Luckily, we're at 9, not 8. So the game's definitely still kind of hanging in the balance. But we've got this constant gaining of life, which is definitely nice. So we may just want to deploy the Mana War here. We can bounce our opponent's white main lion, or the core Hookmaster. Neither of those plays are that attractive. We could also just replay Wake of Vultures. Our opponent's going to have the upkeep cost on Sting Scourger still. So I think we can afford to just play Wake of Vultures here and pass back. We also gain 1, which is nice, from our come into play tap land. We're certainly not going to be attacking with Peregrine Drake. So it'll be interesting to see if our opponent does pay for the Sting Scourger or not. Alright, so if they pay for it, it means we're basically not going to die this turn unless our opponent has some sort of falter here. So our opponent actually doesn't have any great attacks. Alright, so they're just passing. So that's great for us. And we actually drew the green Honden. So why not just play it? Why not? We're at 10, which is a relatively safe life total. So we can play the green Honden. We can also just get this Mana War into play. And I think we want to just bounce the core Hookmaster or the Sting Scourger. It's one of the two. Or even the white main lion. Not really sure which one. Alright, let's go for the white main lion. That was kind of the third one initially on the list, but we're just going to bounce it anyways. Now we've got our Honden synergy going, but our opponent's at 21 life, and we're going to be drawing essentially 4 cards a turn. So at some point, we're going to have to start thinking about attacking our opponent, but it looks like instead we're facing our opponent's attack, so we're just going to make the pretty clear blocks and see what happens. It looks like just a white main lion that we already knew our opponent had in hand. So that's probably going to just bounce this core Hookmaster, and our opponent's going to replay it, probably tapping our Wake of Vultures, I would guess. But these Saprolings are actually a legitimate threat that we're creating for ourselves. And now that we're going up to 16 life, we're basically out of range. And there's the Maelstrom Wanderer. Alright, I think it's about that time in the game where we cast that card. So yep, we're just gonna go ahead and do it. And let's see what we get. Alright. White Honden, it's basically not at all what we wanted. But Annihilate is pretty good. So we're just going to annihilate the Hookmaster. and start attacking. Can't win if you don't attack, right? Well, depending on the deck, but we definitely have to start putting pressure on our opponent. So that's a good chunk of damage we just dealt. And we can start going ahead and discarding some of our land, some of the stuff we don't really need. We basically don't need to gain any more life this game. It's just a matter of closing things out. So we have Mana War. That can bounce our opponent's white main lion. So let's go ahead and do that. We could have also pacifismed it. That might have been a little bit better, but I think our opponent's pretty likely to just die here. White main lion, of course, isn't going to do anything. It's just going to bounce itself. And alright, it looks like our opponent's just giving up, basically. So, yeah. I mean, this is how to close out the game in style. Seems like Maelstrom Wanderer is just one of the best ways to close out the game. And yep, that's going to be the match. I was pretty surprised that White-Red didn't present more of an issue, but that's all she wrote.